Good evening. It's so exciting to see all of you. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Ilinka Skalko, and I am the UNCG College Republicans Chair. About this time last year, actually, we restarted our group on campus. It was an existing group, but for a couple of years, it's kind of just disappeared. So it's kind of, we've been here for a year, as what I know. And kind of my hopes and dreams coming into this for this club were to put the stereotypes aside and to educate and inform my peers about the conservative movement and the history of it, but also learn from my peers and have an open mind about their ideas and beliefs. I cannot stand here before you today and say that I was, or it still is, easy. However, I can tell you that this event, sponsored by College Republicans, who is a conservative group on campus, it's a student group recognized by the university, and Young America's Foundation, who is the third party, unless you all have been in the news, we've had some issues with that. It is a third party, and they have helped us donate money and put this whole event together. We're hosting a brilliant writer, scholar, and public intellectual on this very liberal arts-minded campus. I'm so proud to just be here with you all and experience it. Our speaker tonight is one of the top names in the conservative movement, Dinesh D'Souza. He's a former policymaker analysis in the Reagan White House and also served as the John M. Olin Felon at the American Enterprise Institute. He served as the president of the King's College in New York City from 2010 and 2012. His first book, Illiberal Education, 1991, publicized the phenomenon of political correctness in America's college and universities and became a New York Times bestseller. It has been listed as one of the most influential books of the 1990s. His 1997 book, one of my favorites, Ronald Reagan, How an Ordinary Man Became an Extraordinary Leader, was the first book to make the case of Reagan's intellectual and political influence. He later wrote New York Times bestseller, What's So Great About America, which was critically acclaimed for its thoughtful patriotism. Letters to a Young Conservative, which has become a handbook for a generation of young conservatives inspired by Dinesh's style and ideas. He has recognized the need of conservative influence on college campuses and inspired many students to stand up for what they believe and become leaders on their college campuses by spreading the conservative message. Just as in his early years, D'Souza was one of the nation's most articulate spokesmen for reasoned and thoughtful conservatism. In recent years, he has been an equally brilliant and forceful defender of Christianity. Another one of my favorite, What's So Great About Christianity, not only intelligently explained the core doctrine of the Christian faith, it also explained how the freedom of prosperity associated with Western civilization rests upon the foundation of biblical Christianity. He has also become a renowned filmmaker with top-grossing documentaries, 2016 Obama's America, America Imagine a World Without Her, and Hillary's America. Through these documentaries, he has challenged the current system and government and has continued to educate, inform, and inspire the American people. He's personally here today to talk about his new book, The Big Lie, and expose the Nazi roots of the American left. It is my pleasure, and I'm so excited to introduce you. Please stand up and welcome Dinesh D'Souza.
Wow, thank you. Thank you very much. This is great. I hear there were a few protesters outside, very peaceful, not brandishing, not weapons happily, but just brochures and pamphlets, propaganda. The good thing about a university setting is that we can test these arguments against the light of debate and the light of truth. So that's what I'm here to talk about. Wow, what a political climate we've been in since Trump's election several months ago. Nobody kind of expected it, I don't think. I'm not sure I did either. And you can be sure that the guys at MSNBC and CNN, just by the look on their faces, I mean, so much expended energy. I mean, those guys, forget about the DNC rigging elections and things. I mean, the media had been trying for months to drag that crooked hag across the finish line. And it didn't work. Just the constipated look on the face of Wolf Blitzer on election night, to me, was worth the whole election. And that's the thing. I mean, for those of us who know Hillary, know about Hillary, look, they're investigating Trump. Think about this. Imagine what people would say if Trump took $145 million from the Russian government or instruments of the Russian government, deposited that money in the Trump Foundation, and literally in exchange agreed to sell not wheat, not cement, but 20% of the United States' uranium to what today even the Democrats seem to acknowledge is our foe, our enemy. This, I think, he would have been out of there by now had Trump done that. And so part of what, the mystery of American politics is the sort of peculiar immunity of the Clintons. But I don't want to talk about the Clintons. We're sort of done with them. And I want to actually focus on on intellectual topics. And I'm going to zoom in this. I could talk about the saga of our own Corleone family, but we don't want to do that here tonight. We want to talk about two things that have been dominant themes since the election. The first, of course, is the race card. The race card. And the other is the fascism card. And both these cards are played to great effect. The race card is sort of old. We've been seeing it now for almost a generation. It's worked very effectively, and that's why the left and the Democrats keep playing it. And the basic idea of the race card is that the Republicans, the conservatives, the right, is the party of racism. And since Trump's election, the left has sort of upped the ante on that and played a second card, if anything more incendiary than the race card, and that's not just the fascism card, but the Nazi card. Trump is a fascist. The Republicans, the conservatives, are the neo-Nazi party. And for the left, Charlottesville was almost, you might almost say it was a play staged to dramatic effect, because it appeared to completely confirm both the race card and the fascism card. Here were white supremacists, evidently, in Trump hats. And so, naturally, this got incendiary coverage. I saw one photo of social media of one white supremacist surrounded by like 40 reporters. Never has a solitary white supremacist got so much attention. But what's going on here is, and you have to see that from the media's point of view, these aren't just stories, because what is the principle of selection that governs whether or not the New York Times or CNN or CBS consider something a story? How do they decide if something is a story or not? Well, the answer is they use what you may call the meta-story, the story behind the story. And the meta-story is the right is racist and fascist. So it only takes one white supremacist in a Trump hat for people to go, ah. Now, if there were 40 KKK chapters that endorsed Hillary, that's not news, because that doesn't fit the meta-story. The meta-story sets the pattern for what is considered news in the first place. But I'm trying to decide whether to talk about fascism first or racism first. I think I'll talk about fascism first, in part because, well, we have anti-fascist protesters outside. And they're here to complain about this fascist event involving apparently some non-white immigrant Indian guy spouting fascism. Yes, indeed. I'll begin by talking about Trump and the charge that Trump is a fascist. What's very interesting is the people who say this never begin by spelling out what fascism is. They never spell out what fascism means. They never lay out the philosophy of fascism and then lay alongside it Trump's philosophy and go, hey, they match. I mean, think about this. We're very familiar with the philosopher of Marxism. Marx. We're very familiar with the philosopher of capitalism, Adam Smith. Who's the philosopher of fascism? It's hard to say. No one knows. Even educated people don't know. Why? Because somehow the actual ideological content of fascism has gone underground. And so what we get today is what I want to call fake fascism. Fake fascism is definitions of fascism that are never seriously advanced, but are sort of implied. And the idea is that Trump is a fascist because he is one of these things. So let's look at a couple of those things. Trump is a fascist because the left says he's an ultra-nationalist. Trump wants to make America great again. Hey, didn't Hitler want to make Germany great again? Now, nationalism, it turns out, is actually one of the features of fascism, but not an essential one. And moreover, nationalism is as common on the left as it is on the right. There are many nationalist figures. For example, from India, Gandhi was a nationalist. Mandela in South Africa was a nationalist. Fidel Castro was a nationalist, as was Che Guevara. All the anti-colonial leaders, without exception, Nkrumah in Ghana and so on, all of them nationalists. Winston Churchill was a nationalist, as was de Gaulle. Now, Abraham Lincoln was a nationalist, as were the American founders. Now, does it make any sense to call these people all fascists? No. Clearly, nationalism does not equal fascism pure and simple. Something more is going on. Well, Trump is a nationalist, Trump is a fascist because he's a racist. Well, how exactly is Trump a racist? Well, he's against Muslims. He doesn't like immigrants, just like Hitler. First of all, Hitler sort of liked Muslims. Hitler tried to make alliances with the Muslims against the Jews. The Nazis actually sent delegations to Egypt and to Iran. Just by the way of small sidelight of history, Iran was actually named Iran because of the Nazis. The Nazis convinced the Shah that the Iranians were in fact Aryans. And the Shah was so excited to be supplied with this Germanic anthropological information that he changed the name of his country to say Iran, which actually is a version of the name Aryan. This all goes back to World War II. Now, here's what I'm getting at. The Jews in Germany were not immigrants. They weren't illegals. They weren't swimming across the Rio Grande. They were Germans. So the line that Hitler was drawing was not between the immigrant and the native. The Jews were natives. Hitler was drawing a line within Germany between the Nordic Germans, as he saw them, and the Jews. Now, Trump is drawing a line, but Trump's line is not between the immigrant and the native. Trump's line is between the legal and the illegal. And it's not even right to say it's between the legal and illegal immigrant, because illegal immigrants aren't immigrants. Even that term is a misnomer. Now, here's the point. The vast majority of legal immigrants who come to America, and this has been true now for a whole generation, are not white. They don't come from Europe. They come from Asia, from Africa, from South America. Now, you could accuse Trump of racism if Trump said something like, well, gee, we're really sick of having all these people from South Korea and India and the West Indies coming legally to America. We need to have immigrants coming only from Australia, Canada, and Great Britain. But Trump has never said anything remotely resembling this. In other words, Trump's line is not a racial line at all. At all. So the whole idea that Trump is a fascist because he is a racist is wrong, not merely because Trump isn't drawing a racial line, but here's something very interesting. Fascism in and of itself is not racist at all. This may seem very odd to say, but there's nothing in fascist ideology. And in fact, there have been fascist parties. Consider Mussolini in Italy. Mussolini was actually the world's first fascist, by which I mean he was the guy who started fascism as a real political phenomenon. He created the world's first fascist regime in Italy in 1922. Now, Mussolini was not in the same species as Hitler. In fact, Mussolini never identified with Hitler's National Socialism. Just like Hitler, by the way, rarely called himself a fascist. Mussolini had no concentration camps. Mussolini did not practice segregation. Mussolini didn't have any of the exterminations that we saw in Nazi Germany. The kind of racist anti-Semitic ideology that Hitler espoused, completely alien to Mussolini. Many of the founders of Italian fascism were Jews. Mussolini actually rescued Jews in World War II. When the Nazis ordered Mussolini to turn over the Jews, Mussolini flatly refused. So what I'm getting at here is the quality of our political discussion on these topics is so vacuous that acres upon acres are written on the assumption that fascism by itself is racist, even though in reality only one species of fascism, namely National Socialism, is in fact racist. In fact, you couldn't even compare the racism of the Democratic Party with Mussolini. The Democrats were much worse. Their history is so bad that you'd have to go to Nazi Germany to find a fascism whose racism even remotely compares with the racism of the US American Democratic Party. And not only that, but the racism of Nazi Germany lasted 12 years, from 1933 to 1945. The racism of the Democratic Party lasted 150 years. So considerably longer duration. Now, in order to think about fascism, is it right-wing or left-wing? The first question you might ask is, how did we get fascism? Where did it come from? What's its roots? What's its origin? Remarkably, fascism grew out of Marxism. In other words, in the early 20th century, there was a huge debate among Marxists in Europe. Marx had predicted that there would be communist revolutions breaking out throughout the industrialized world. Marx didn't say that he wanted this to happen. He wasn't calling on the workers to revolt. Marx predicted it, almost like a scientific law. He said it's going to happen, whether you want it to happen or not. But it didn't happen. Think about it. Although Marx wrote starting in the 1840s, over 150 years ago, in no country in the world until this day has there been an actual workers' revolt to overthrow the bourgeois or the capitalist class. That has never happened anywhere in the world. And so there was a crisis of Marxism. All these pointy-headed guys had adored Marx and were waiting for this revolution, but it just never occurred. And so the smart Marxists began to say, you know what, something's wrong with Marxism. Something is wrong with this idea that there's going to be a class revolt of one class of people, the workers, against the capitalists. One of those Marxists was Benito Mussolini. Mussolini was the most famous Marxist in Italy, a position he later shared with Gramsci. And Mussolini was the editor of the Socialist Party magazine, Avanti. And so Mussolini was a man of the left, and a Marxist by his own admission, and a socialist, which he remained all his life. And Mussolini basically goes, Marx has got something fundamentally wrong. Mussolini had observed in World War I that the French socialists fought for France, and the British socialists fought for Britain, and the German socialists fought for Germany. And so Mussolini goes, class is very important, yes, but national allegiance is also important. People fight for their own country. And so Mussolini said, to save socialism, we need a kind of new type of socialism that isn't just socialist in the Marxian sense, but is national socialism. This is where we get fascism. Fascism essentially weds the idea of the nation to the idea of socialism. Adolf Hitler was a socialist and a labor leader. When Hitler came to power, he changed the name of the German Workers' Party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. He insisted on putting socialism in the title. And one of the remarkable things today is that the left has figured out a way to take the socialism out of National Socialism, to pretend that the Nazis weren't really socialists at all. In other words, the left is trying to read into Nazism a sort of new layer of meaning that departs from what the Nazis themselves actually said. Now, all the leading Nazis were serious about socialism. In fact, Goebbels, the propaganda minister very close to Hitler, said that if you compare nationalism and socialism, he says, which is more important? He goes, socialism is more important. He goes, national is the adjective, and socialism is the noun. At the end of the day, we care about our nation, but most of all, we care about socialism. Goering thought the same thing, Strasser did, Hitler did. So the socialism of National Socialism is absolutely critical, and you can see it right there in the Nazi 25-point program. The Nazis had a platform. And the beauty of it is we can find it online, you can read it. I predict that if you took that Nazi platform, crossed out the word Jew, instead replaced it simply with this term, the top 1%, the top 1%, and read the Nazi platform at a Democratic Party national convention, you would have a multitude of standing ovations. Why? Because Hitler's program sounds like Bernie's program. It sounds like Elizabeth Warren. It's the same rhetoric. A lot of Hitler's anger at the Jews is that they were swindlers, they were bankers, they were money men. Hitler, in fact, contrasts what he calls productive capitalism, sort of like agriculture, with finance capitalism. And he says finance capitalism is the enemy. Now notice today, if you look at the Democratic Party, they don't attack productive capitalism. You see them going after Procter & Gamble or Target. No, they go after Wall Street, the 1%, the bankers, the swindlers. So what I'm getting at here is this is the legacy of Nazism. Now, earlier I raised the question, who is the great thinker of fascism? The great thinker of fascism was actually a philosopher named Giovanni Gentile. He was Mussolini's minister of education, and he was considered in the early 20th century one of the most famous philosophers in the world. He was a student of Hegel and Bergson, and he argued for a fascism that gave it a certain intellectual grounding that would actually be today indispensable to the left. What's really remarkable is we never hear of Gentile, and my theory is that we don't hear about Gentile because for the left to acknowledge him is to immediately acknowledge the way in which his ideas correspond very closely with the principles of the left and the Democratic Party now. Now. Not once upon a time, but today. So basically what Gentile says is that there are two views of government. In one view, the individual is important. In one view, the government serves the individual. In one view, the power of the government is limited. And this Gentile essentially calls liberal democracy. Liberal in the small L, or classically liberal sense of the term. And Gentile goes, we completely reject this. Gentile goes, in reality, man is a social animal. He's not an individual. He doesn't make a social contract with anybody a la Locke. He doesn't get to limit the powers of the government. Man exists from the beginning in society. And who speaks for society? The state. The state is the agent of society. And society, Gentile says, is like a living organism. It's like a frog. And the living organism is made up of cells. Each individual is nothing more than a cell inside of the organism. And what is the value of the cell? Nothing. Does the cell have rights? Of course not. The cell is only valuable to the degree it serves the organism. So Gentile is the prophet of the centralized state. And Mussolini, who by the way co-authored a bunch of stuff with Gentile and actually defined fascism for the world, Mussolini goes, everything in the state and nothing outside the state. And this is the core meaning of fascism. It is that you have a centralized, all-powerful government, and this government gets to rule over the economy, the private economy, state-run capitalism, and it gets to rule over the lives of individual citizens. It is the all-powerful central force that defines and governs a society. Now, think about this. Does this sound more like the platform of the Republican Party or the platform of the Democratic Party? This notion of the all-powerful centralized state is clearly a phenomenon of the left. Gentile thought so, Mussolini thought so, Hitler thought so, everybody thought so. Not just the fascists, the anti-fascists before World War II all agreed that fascism was on the left. Who thought fascism was on the left? FDR did. FDR recognized that Mussolini was kind of a kindred spirit. And therefore, FDR dispatched members of his brain trust to Rome, to fascist Italy, to study fascism, which he considered to be more progressive than the New Deal. He wanted to bring fascist ideas to America. Mussolini, for his part, loved FDR. Mussolini reviewed FDR's book in an Italian magazine. I summarized the review. He's a great guy. He's one of us. He's a fascist. Now, very interestingly, there is no American textbook in any high school or middle school or college that will tell you any of this. And yet, I want to emphasize that what I'm telling you this evening is not controversial. I'm not giving you the conservative viewpoint on fascism. I am telling you what fascism is according to the fascists themselves. And since I published this book, The Big Lie, there are probably 36 leading fascist scholars in the world. Most of them are quoted in the book. There's not a single prominent scholar of fascism who has challenged, let alone refuted, a single contention in the book, and by extension, anything I'm about to tell you tonight. Now, fascism today, if we ask, where is fascism now? I would argue that we're seeing fascism really today in 3 places, and they're all on the left. There's nothing about Trump that's fascist. Well, Trump's an authoritarian. Trump's an authoritarian. This is Meryl Streep, by the way. Meryl Streep says, Trump's an authoritarian because he gives me hell on Twitter. Now, first of all, real authoritarians dispatch thugs and brown shirts to shut down radio stations if Trump was a real authoritarian, he wouldn't be flayed on 300 media platforms every second of every day. He would have sent goons into the New York Times and shut that place down. He would have sent the members of the Army or the FBI to CNN, and Wolf Blitzer would be sitting in a cell right now. Trump's done none of this. So the first element of fascism we see on the left today is, I would call it, fascist economics. Now, fascist economics is not a merger of the private and the public. It is not the private sector controlling the state. The clear meaning of fascism is state-directed capitalism. The government runs the private economy. Now, first you have to notice that the economy is private under fascism. And notice that here in America, we don't have socialism in the Marxian sense. Consider Obamacare. We have private hospitals. We have private insurance companies. But somebody's telling them what to do. Who? The state. And what is the state doing? The insurance company provides the insurance, but the state sets the prices. The insurance company provides the insurance, but the state decides who's eligible and who isn't. This is clinically state-directed capitalism, i.e., this is, in fact, fascism. And under Obama, we have seen this kind of government regulatory control extended not just to hospitals, doctors, hospices, insurance companies, but also banks, investment companies, auto companies. Here's Obama firing the head of a major auto company, increasingly the energy sector. So guys like Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, I've stopped thinking of them really as socialists in the Marxist sense, because in true socialism, the state nationalizes industry. The government actually runs private industry, takes it over. In India, we had socialism. The government would take over the airlines, for example, and run them. So if the government were to take over, let's say, the energy sector, this means that people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren would have to go to Midland, Texas, do fracking, take oil out of the ground, put it in drums. Now, they don't want to do that. They don't know how to do that. You can't call them really socialists. They're too lazy to be socialists. They want the Texans to go into the ground and take the oil out. You do it. Once you got the oil out, you put it in drums, you label it, you create the wealth, we will saunter in and tell you what to do with it. That's really not Marxism. That's actually fascism. That's the first part. The second part of fascism is deploying thugs to curtail free speech. Now, the Nazis had a book burning. And their book burning in 1933, 10,000 books set ablaze. Most colleges today don't have to have a book burning because they don't assign those books. The books that they want to ban are never assigned. They're never taught. Speakers who reflect those points of view are often never invited. Now, people say, well, what about those, there's the protesters outside today. They have a little brochure here that I saw for a moment. It says, what about the white supremacists who support Trump? Like all 17 of them. What about those guys? Aren't they the greatest threat in this country right now? No, they're actually not. Why? Not because there aren't bad guys. There are bad guys. But because they don't have any power. In order to be a real threat, you have to have real power. So contrast for a moment the white supremacists in Charlottesville. By the way, it's worth pointing out that Jason Kessler, the organizer of the Charlottesville hate rally, is an Obama guy. Jason Kessler is also an Occupy Wall Street guy. Jason Kessler, according to his girlfriend, was a leftist only a year ago. This is the how many white supremacists are Obama guys? Not a whole lot. Something a little fishy was going on in Charlottesville. I'm still not sure we've gotten to the bottom of it. But nevertheless, taking it at face value, what I'm trying to say is that those guys in Charlottesville do not have real cultural or political power. Antifa at Berkeley does. The reason the cops are called off at Berkeley is Jesse Aragon, the mayor of Berkeley, belongs to Antifa Facebook meeting groups. He's a member of the team. He calls off the cops. Antifa has powerful supporters in Hollywood, in the media, in the Democratic Party. It's much more difficult to get the Democrats to denounce Antifa. Nancy Pelosi finally did. I believe she's the only one. Than it is to get conservatives to denounce white supremacists or neo-Nazis. I've been in the conservative movement for 25 years. I've never been to an event where there was a Ku Klux Klansman or a neo-Nazi. The whole notion that these guys represent something mainstream on the right is preposterous. Now, what's interesting about these Antifa guys is that they pose anti-fascists. Anti-fascists. And they say, no free speech for fascists. Except the people they target aren't fascists. The people they target are people like Condoleezza Rice and Charles Murray and Ben Shapiro. In other words, they're targeting mainstream Republicans and conservatives. And by calling those people fascists, they're legitimizing violence against them and pretending like they are fighting hate speech. But Ben Shapiro isn't giving you hate speech. I'm not giving you hate speech. I'm giving you arguments rooted in history that are open to refutation and debate. In my movie Hillary's America, I made the following statement about racism. In 1860, the year of the Civil War, I said, no Republican owned a slave. I did not say no Republican leader owned a slave. I said no Republican owned a slave at all. All the slaves in the United States, 4 million of them, were owned by Democrats. Now, this is a very interesting statement. Again, I defy you to find it in any textbook. I defy you to find it anywhere at all. And yet it happens to be irrefutably true. And by irrefutably true, what I mean is, it's a scientific statement in the classical sense. It's a statement that's open to refutation. All you have to do is give me the names of 5 Republicans. Again, not Republican leaders, 5 Republicans who own slaves, and I would have to take it back. But to this moment, no one has. About 6 months ago, a guy wrote me. He says, I'm a PhD student, and I've been researching this topic because what you said really disturbed me. That there is a counterexample to what you said. Ulysses S. Grant inherited a slave, one slave, on his wife's side. And I said, ordinarily that would be a touche, but in this particular case, when that happened, Ulysses S. Grant was a Democrat. So, now, let me use that example to pivot from fascism a little bit to talk about racism. Because, and I won't belabor something I've dwelt on before, the long, almost unceasing history of the racism of the Democratic Party. Not just slavery. The Democrats passed every segregation law in the South. Every single one. So this is not a case of there's plenty of blame to go around, Dinesh. No, there's not plenty of blame to go around. One party did it all. And that's what gives the big lie to the toppling of the statues. You know, America did this and America did that, and we got to kneel for the national anthem. No, jackass, America didn't do it. You did it. Your party did it. Some Americans did these things and other Americans stopped them. The Ku Klux Klan. What about David Duke? Well, what about David Duke? David Duke is an excommunicate in the Republican Party. All the Democratic Klansmen have buildings named after them. Right now. Right now. Robert Byrd, half of West Virginia is named after Robert Byrd. Do you see Antifa tearing down his statues? You see them pulling down the signs for the Robert Byrd Highway, the Robert Byrd Medical Center, the Robert Byrd this? No. Why? He's a nice Klansman. He's one of theirs. So this is the shameful history of a party that has frankly never admitted its history, never apologized for it, never paid 1 penny in restitution for it. Now, what I want to focus on tonight before I open the door to questions is this notion that because the Democrats, if you push them, you force them, they will admit, yes, true, we did all that. They can't get out of it because the history is right there. And so what they say is, although we did it, it's not us anymore. Why? Because the party switched sides. The party swapped platforms. Now, on the face of it, you should always be a little wary of this. This is kind of like the guy who comes and says, I'm going to tell you about the time when the cops all became robbers, and the robbers all became cops. I mean, it's whacked on the face of it. But, so be suspicious of it, demand proof, right? So the party switch sides, okay. Well, let's look at the Democratic platform in the 30s. The welfare state, Social Security, the Great Society, expanding government. Is that the platform now of the Republican Party? No. We didn't switch sides. They're on the same side. Abraham Lincoln, in talking about slavery, defined slavery in a very simple way. You work, I eat. That's the essence of slavery. It's robbing another guy of his labor. And the core of Lincoln's philosophy is the opposite. In other words, people get to keep their own stuff. Or as Lincoln puts it, the hand that grows the corn has the right to put the corn into its own mouth. And I ask you, is that not even now the philosophy of the Republican Party? The hand that grows the corn has the right to eat the corn. And is it not the case that in a modified form, the Democratic Party, even now, if you had to give a core phrase that describes its operational platform, we could do a lot worse than you work, I eat. That's what the party stands for now. A word about Nixon's so-called Southern strategy. Supposedly, Nixon, being tricky Dick and all, decided that he was going to effectuate an amazing party switch. He was going to get the racist Dixiecrats to become Republicans. He was going to win over the Deep South by making racist appeals. This is the so-called Southern strategy. I see two immediate problems with it. First, no person has ever cited a single example of any of those racist appeals. If Nixon was making racist appeals to the South, you'd think we'd have heard them. We have all his speeches. We have a video of all his statements. Where are the racist appeals? There are none. And second, if there were these racist appeals, which there weren't, they didn't work. Nixon lost the Deep South. George Wallace took the Deep South. And in fact, only one Dixiecrat became a Republican. One guy, Strom Thurmond. And that was long before Nixon. So all the other racist Dixiecrats remained in the Democratic Party. They died as Democrats. This whole notion that the racist Dixiecrats became Republicans is a flat-out lie. It's not true. I defy you to name me three. And again, the beauty of this kind of talk happening today is you can check me out. You can check me out on your phone in 5 minutes, and you'll know right away if what I'm telling you is true. It is true. Now, the Republican Party won the South, and that process culminated in the 80s. The South became Republican because of the Reaganite appeal to patriotism, anti-communism, free markets, pro-life, Christianity. This was the siren song that drew the South to the Republican Party. As the South became less racist, it became more Republican. There's an inverse relationship between Southern racism and Southern Republicanism. Again, this is documented. There is if you look at survey evidence, there is a steep drop of racism throughout the 20th century in the South. And this corresponds with an upward trajectory of the South moving toward the Republican orbit. Now, let me sum up. Kind of what I'm saying here is that the big lie is to take all the bad stuff that you do, the left, the Democrats, and project it onto the other side. Now, normally, you can't get away with the big lie. You can't pull it off. But the left can do it in this country because it dominates the three largest megaphones of our culture: academia, Hollywood, and the media. If you have those three, you can put out a lot of big lies. Why? Because even if the guy in the third row knew it was a lie, he doesn't have a big enough megaphone to say so. That's why I'm making movies. Because that's a way to build a megaphone for myself, so I can get my ideas out as well. A little bit like the fat guy, Michael Moore. So Trump can't be a fascist without also being a socialist. Socialism is the heart of fascism. Trump isn't a fascist. Why are these, I'll conclude by examining very briefly this question: why do some of these ragtag white nationalists, insignificant though they may be, why might they even like Trump? Why might any of them even vote for Trump? Why would even one of them vote for Trump? Here's the answer. The Democratic Party invented white nationalism. It created these guys. It created David Duke. It created Robert Byrd. It created the Ku Klux Klan. But having created them, at some point, the Democratic Party decided to do what you can call an ethnic nationalism pivot. To pivot away from white nationalism, reject it, and embrace every other ethnic nationalism. Black pride, black power, Latino power, Asian power, immigrant power. In other words, to emphasize every other ethnic nationalism and mobilize it against white nationalism. So the white nationalist, who was once the apple of the eye of the Democratic Party, has suddenly become a kind of pariah. Where's he going to go? Right? Now, the reason that he looks to Trump is not because Trump is a white nationalist. No, Trump is an American nationalist. But an American nationalism, at least in theory, makes room for everybody. If you're American, you're in the club. And so if you're a white nationalist faced with the choice of a Democratic Party, which is your natural home, and which you would willingly sign up for. Remember, for many decades, the civil rights activists and the Ku Klux Klan were in the same party. Martin Luther King and the Klan were in the same party. In the 1930s, when blacks began to switch their votes from Republican to Democrat, the Democratic Party was the party of segregation and the KKK. So the white nationalists and the other nationalists all got along, I wouldn't say just fine, but they were in the same tent. But now, Trump's American nationalism, which is routinely conflated with white nationalism. Trump is a white nationalist. No, he's not. He's not a white nationalist. He's an American nationalist. And I would argue that this American nationalism is exactly the nationalism that pulled the country together in the Civil War. It's the same nationalism that rallied America at the time of the Revolution. So fascism and racism are not phenomena of the right, never have been, and are not now. And so the whole hate speech thing is pure bunkum. It's pure bunkum. It's an attempt to pin the racist tail on the Republican elephant. It's an attempt to pin the fascist tail on the Republican elephant, whereas both tails belong very securely on the behind of the Democratic donkey. Thank you very much.
We will now open the floor for a Q&A. If you have a question for Dinesh, please stand up and move to the left side of this aisle and come around the back and wait at this yellow line. Each audience member will get one question. So please stand up and... You guys... You got to go around this way.
I hear you.
I need you to go this way.
Thank you.
My question isn't a question per se, but I want to talk about the bigger lie than the big lie. And for me, being a Republican for more than 50 years, the biggest lie I hear is that we don't talk about the fact that blacks founded the Republican Party. And we did, by neglecting this particular part of the story, we give people the impression that we don't exist, that we don't, we aren't important. So I brought you a copy of my booklet on African Americans in the Republican Party that defines the history of the Republican Party. And I'd like to say that I'm happy to have you in UNCG because this is my alma mater.
So this is a Republican committeewoman making the point that blacks have been central to the Republican Party from the beginning. And there's probably some things in here I don't even know, and I'm looking forward to reading. But let me make the point that there's confirmation of this idea that comes, interestingly enough, from the Democrats. Because in the 19th century, the slogan of the Democrats in attacking Republicans was to call them the Black Republicans. Even Lincoln. I mean, there are posters of Lincoln in which Lincoln is actually described as, quote, a nigger. And Lincoln was basically described, and there was a whole fake historiography trying to prove that Lincoln was half black. So what I'm getting at here is that the Democrats at that time were doing the opposite of what they're doing now. At that time, recognizing the power of racism, they were trying to use that vitriol against the Republican Party. Now they're trying to do the opposite and take racism, just like they're taking Nazism. See, remember, before World War II, as I said, everybody knew Nazism was on the left. But once American troops went into the gas chambers, not the gas chambers, but the concentration camps, and out came those ghostly, emaciated figures, starving, tottering, incoherent, immediately fascism and Nazism became indefensible. Around this time, the progressives were coming to power in America, in academia, in the media, and Hollywood. They knew that Nazism was on the left. They knew it. But they said, look, we've got to cover that up. If young people know about this, the Democratic Party is finished. What we have to do is hide the association between fascism and the left. And we've got to take fascism and move it into the right-wing column. This is the big lie. So the big lie is not just Trump. It long predates Trump. It is a big lie with fascism that's been going on for 75 years. Okay, let's go on. Yes, sir.
I have a question that has long confounded me that I would love to get your perspective on. Why is it that the left, with all its different identity groups that it purports to champion, why is it so enamored with and defensive about Islam that is very hostile to many of those exact same interest groups the left pretends to champion?
So the question is, if the Muslims want to put women into burqas and toss gays out of windows, how to explain the fact that they're so welcome at the multicultural picnic?
Better way of putting it.
Well, interestingly, the answer is that in politics, sometimes the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now, the Muslims are doing those things, but not over here. They're doing those things over there. And the left knows about it, but it's not their main concern. Their main concern is right here. From the left's point of view, the biggest danger in American society isn't radical Islam or isn't a bunch of guys trying to blow up the country. It's Trump. Trump is the clear and present danger facing the United States. All allies who can be recruited against Trump and the right are welcome. And so, because of the immigration issue, because of the security issue, Trump's travel ban, Muslims are sort of a right population for the left to pick. And they become good foot soldiers in the political battle against Trump. So it is the monomaniacal focus on Trump as the bad guy that explains the sort of promiscuity of the left in welcoming all kinds of allies who might be dubious on their own merits, but have signed up to fight in the anti-Trump crusade.
Thank you very much for coming first, and thanks for the Young American Foundation for the event. First of all, I think I'm the worst nightmare for leftists because, one, I'm an immigrant, legal. Second, I'm a Jewish and from Israel. And also because I'm from NC State, I guess.
What's your third reason?
Because I'm from NC State, so I drove all the way from here. So, and I'm here over 3.5 years in the United States, and I like it here. And I think it's the best country in the world. One, because there's a lot of opportunities here. I didn't say Israel is not great, but there's a lot to learn. And as you said, India is a socialist country. Israel is also a socialist country. There's a universal health care, but it's not that good. And my question is about academia. So teachers, I don't know if here at UNCG is the same, but I kind of see it now. Thank you. That they try to put some ideas of socialism and Marxism, and I don't know if I should fight versus the teachers, or just be a parrot, write word by word on my paper, and just get the A and leave the faculty and be so happy.
Well, I would say that you should do that. In other words, the faculty are in a position of great power over you while you are in their class. And these are not guys who are, for the most part, open-minded. Some are, but the majority aren't. There's a Princeton professor named Kevin Cruz who's been saying on social media, Dinesh keeps saying the Democratic Party is the party of slavery, segregation, racial terrorism, and the Ku Klux Klan. He goes, everybody knows that. And I'm like, everybody knows that? Do you teach that in your class? I point out in The Big Lie that FDR, this is the sainted progressive of the 20th century, FDR made a deal with the racist Democrats in the 30s to get the New Deal through. He needed the votes of the racist Democrats, so he brought him in. The racist Democrats told FDR, okay, we'll support the New Deal on 2 conditions. Number 1, you have to block all anti-lynching legislation. Think about that. FDR agrees. Number 2, blacks must be excluded from the most popular New Deal programs. No Social Security for blacks. Now, you don't have to say that, but most blacks work in domestic service or they work in the field. Exclude those 2 professions from Social Security. FDR agrees again. Now, think about this. Again, is this taught in our schools and universities? No. There's nothing on the Republican side that even compares to this. This is what makes the big lie so big. Now, if you're a student, you've got to think of, how do I fight this? How do I open the American mind? I mean, I think at the very least, you have to assign yourself the task of being a kind of intellectual guerrilla. Not gorilla, but guerrilla, figuring out ways to undermine this lying orthodoxy. And you have to think of creative ways to do that. I mean, bringing speakers to campus, that's one way, but it's hit and run. I come on Monday, I'm gone on Tuesday. The professors are here every day. So as students, as members of the community, I see many members of the community here, think of ways that you can exercise your influence to bring alternative points of view to this campus. They may not be welcome, and that's why you may have to shove it down their throat.
I certainly hope that, and I believe in my heart of hearts, that the conservative movement is going to succeed and that we are going to have great success in this country in the future. But I guess my question is, what does the left have in store for the country if they succeed in impeaching the president? Is the ideology you just described what they have in store for us if we fail to keep the republic intact? Or is it just some vacuous idea? I guess I'm just trying to figure out what they have to replace freedom, liberty, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. I'm just curious.
Well, they have fascism. Look, the left was on the verge of taking the country. This is why they were so embittered by this election. They thought they had it. I thought they had it. And by it, I don't mean the presidency. I mean the presidency and the Congress and the court. Because once you already have the media and academia and Hollywood, I mean, think of the way, the kind of fanaticism of the other side. You might think, okay, I got Hollywood, I got the media, I got academia. Who cares about the NFL? They care. I mean, a bunch of crazy guys running up and down a field with a ball. But the left wants to own that. The Boy Scouts. A bunch of guys tying knots from trees. Who cares about that? They care about that. They want to make sure that some transgender guy is leading the Boy Scout troop. So the political and cultural aggression enters all spheres of life. Now, this brings me to the third element of fascism I never mentioned. The Nazis call it Gleichschaltung. Gleichschaltung means the whole country marches to the same tune. Nobody is allowed to march out of lockstep. Remember, this is the same thing that Gentile was talking about. All the cells of the body have to work to serve the organism. We can't have dissenters. A dissenter is like a diseased cell that has to be cut out, gotten rid of. This is why I've become, in a way, I would say, a very dangerous American in the last several years, partly because, not just because of what I say, but because I have a megaphone. And so this is why Obama, I speak on campus, people go, well, Dinesh, what makes you think that Obama cares about you? What makes you think you saw your stupid movie? What makes you think he's going to go after you because of a movie you made about him? Well, the reason I think that is because once I released the movie in 2,000 theaters, vituperative attacks on me began to appear on a website titled BarackObama.com. And so I reasonably inferred that the petty narcissist who was then in the White House was behind them. And so look, I've dealt with all this, Holder, Preet Bharara, the whole goon squad, and the fascism of the institutions, that kind of stuff, much more dangerous than the fascism of the street. The real fascists aren't some Antifa guy. I mean, these Antifa guys are morons. A lot of them don't even know half the stuff I said. It'd go right over their heads. But the more dangerous fascist is the Hollywood boss who will throw you, you'll never work again in this industry if you cross him ideologically. Academic deans who control billion-dollar endowments. They can destroy the career of a young academic if you fall out of line. Google, you write a memo against the diversity policy, you're on the street. That kind of stuff is very bad. It's going on in America right now. And this is the nascent fascism. I'm not saying we're living through the Holocaust. We're talking about Hitler circa 1933, early fascism. It's not Trump. It's coming from the other side. Okay, next question.
So going back to the removing of the statues of the Confederate statues, if the Civil War was fought over slavery, and slavery is terrible and wrong, why should we not remove the statues and put them in museums? Like, wouldn't keeping them in public basically like glorify the Union, or not the Union, the Confederacy?
Now, You said the Civil War was about slavery, and for the most part, you're right. What I mean by that is that the secession debate, the North-South debate, fundamentally became, there were other issues involved initially, but it suddenly became, at its crux, a slavery debate. But it's always important to keep some of the complexity in mind. First of all, the debate before the Civil War was never just North-South. It was really Republican-Democrat. The Republicans were anti-slavery across the board. The Democrats in the North protected the Democrats in the South. They were allied in protecting slavery. So it was not a sectional issue then. Second, most Southerners didn't own slaves. Most Confederate soldiers didn't own slaves. Robert E. Lee inherited a few slaves on his wife's side, but he never ran a plantation. He was a military guy. He was away in the military establishment. He had nothing, in a sense, directly to do with slavery at all. And in fact, he made public statements about how he was praying for slavery to end. So if you're trying to pick a bad poster guy, pull his statue down, I wouldn't pick Robert E. Lee. There's a statue of Stephen Douglas sitting in the middle of Chicago, Illinois. This is the leader of the Northern Democrats. No Antifa guys touching his statue. Why? Because it's the big lie to blame it all on the South. They want to pull down the statue of Confederate soldiers. Now let me tell you, the ordinary Confederate soldier was not a slave owner. This is some poor ranch hand or farm hand from Texas or North Carolina. If you ask this guy, why are you fighting in the Civil War? His answer is, because the Yankees are down here. That's his reason, and it's a pretty good reason. It's a pretty good reason. He's not the bad guy. Okay.
So we're talking about big lies. Today I watched the documentary of Clinton Cash and how all the donations or speaking fees or whatever have been run through the Clinton Foundation. Do you think the Justice Department will ever investigate them, or are they going to be let go?
You know, this to me is a very, I don't get it. I mean, somebody must have caught Jeff Sessions, tied him up, and locked him in the basement of the Justice Department, because he has, after a rather distinguished career, he's sort of nowhere to be seen. I don't understand how we can believe in that no one's above the law, equal rights under the law, when this matter isn't even being investigated or prosecuted. It's very strange. So the Clintons are actually a kind of walking example that you can get away with it. And I hope that doesn't prove to be true, but we'll see. Okay.
And this next question will be our last question for the night.
Well, mister, thank you so much for coming tonight, and I really appreciate the speech, everything you give it to us. Like, I've been learning a lot through all the information you give it to me. And myself, I am international from China, actually. And also, I have to say, I'm a newcomer to politics. But I love the Declaration and the Constitution, those two great pieces. I think they're great, that were written in American history ever. And tonight, you have actually confirmed that Democrat Party has been manipulated, altered the truth, and what's actually what are called a fact. So as me and other of my peers, brother in Christ, in sitting in this room, as what we consider ourselves, young Republican, what are some of your suggestions to us that we can do to inherit those valuable treasure and peace from the history?
Step one, become a very dangerous American yourself, which is to say, equip yourself with knowledge. Knowledge is a deadly weapon. People are entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. If you are steeped, and I don't just mean in being able to detect small lies. You know, there are lots of small lies in our culture, right? The whole business in Benghazi was due to a video. Small lie. If you want to keep your doctor, you can. Small lie. But the bigger lies are things like fascism is a phenomenon of the right. It's a very cunning because in order to sustain it, it redefines fascism into something it's not. And so being equipped not just about politics, but history, philosophy, having that kind of Swiss Army knife of knowledge is going to make you a very formidable figure. And then think of ways that you can use your influence. And I would say this to everyone in the room. We are in a time when most of us use very little of our actual influence. And people say to me, well, you know, Dinesh, I don't know, I mean, I only have 30 friends on Facebook. Well, yeah, but they've got 30 friends on Facebook. So we live at a time where you can multiply your influence by sharing information. There's special ways to do that on a campus. Generally, you know, the speakers committees on campus, faculty committees, they tend to be dominated on the left. But if you put your name in, exercise influence where you can, and then equip yourself for the longer term. So it's not necessary to get into a battle with some professor. The truth of it is you may have to navigate around him while you're in his course. You can harass him when you're not. But when you're in his class, you might have to dutifully submit. Just think of it as a game. You're on stage, you're playing a part, and your part is the gullible liberal. And you utter unbelievably stupid things, and he gives you thunderous applause. I mean, the whole thing is amazing to watch. So play along if you have to, but then on other occasions, use your influence to make sure other points of view are heard. Okay? Thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
We actually have one more question.